function. There we go. Okay.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here again. I hate coming after Dan because of the obvious, but I'm going to do my best. So bear with me. So yeah, Dan kind of touched on a little bit of what I'm going to talk about. I'll try not to have too much overlay, but what's really important to point out in terms of treating narcissistic personality disorder, or any personality disorder for that matter, is the lack of self-awareness that narcissists in particular tend to have around the disorder. And a lot of this has to do with denial and a mechanism that they use called projection, that is almost like a barrier for them, so that they don't have to look within and really acknowledge how they are contributing to a lot of the issues that they're having in their relationships. And so when someone is so good at projecting, it's in their personality, it's a part of who they are. They've been doing it, arguably, depending on the therapist you speak to, it started around the age of 6, 7, when they could speak. They learned this way. And so you can see how difficult it is to get them to kind of even just acknowledge the propensity to use these tools that are meant to protect them, much less get them to change it. So, you know, if you're walking along the street and you see someone talking to themselves, you could maybe conclude they're schizophrenic and they need mental help. They need mental help. They need a therapist. If all of a sudden your friend doesn't want to talk to you on the phone and doesn't want to meet you out, and they become a hermit in their house, one could probably conclude that they're suffering from depression and they probably could benefit from therapy. It's not so obvious with narcissistic personality disorder, because narcissists are commonly
Hey, hold on a second. I've got the wrong screen, and I'm not sure why. Hold on just a second. How do I get over there? There we go. Okay, there we go.
okay. So really difficult for the narcissist to recognize that they have a problem, but it can also be difficult for people around the narcissist to recognize that there's a problem that needs to be treated. So that creates difficulty. It is, what we want to remember is that this is a personality disorder, meaning as opposed to depression or something that the person is suffering from or experiencing, but it really isn't it isn't intricately intertwined in who the person is. A personality disorder is different. It is intricately intertwined in who you are. And so that's one of the reasons it takes so long to treat, and it's so difficult to treat. And an example of this would be if you're known for being funny. You've gone through your whole life being humorous. And all of a sudden someone sits you down and says, you know what? This isn't working for you anymore. The goal is to no longer be funny. How difficult would that be for somebody? It's impossible. So, maybe the goal is let's work on being less funny. But if that's who you are and that's who you're used to dealing and relating with the world, it's incredibly overwhelming and suggests that you have obtained that attribute under some unresolved need, unacknowledged need, and now you must change. Should I keep going?
Yep, no, keep going. I don't know why I've got it on whoever's speaking should be on the screen. For some reason, it just flipped back to me for a couple of times, even though I was quiet. So anyway, just ignore it. Just keep going. Thanks.
I could remember working on my marriage and family therapy degree 20 years ago and taking a class on abnormal psychology and narcissistic personality disorder not even being mentioned once. All types of disorders were covered, but never hearing the word narcissist. So this creates another barrier. If we are not even educating master's and graduate level therapists in the college classroom on if they're graduating, not even knowing what NPD is or any personality disorders, or many of them not even hearing the term, how are we expecting these practitioners to go out and be able to actually treat these people with any level of success? And that's what Professor George is doing with all of you here. He's trying to expose you to a subject that statistically you're far likely to ever be exposed to, even if you were to go on to attempt to acquire a graduate level in psychology. So the third issue, the difficulty in treating narcissists, is therapists tend to gravitate toward the type of therapy. So Eleanor Greenberg, who I follow and is a therapist that I love, she's been trained in Gestalt therapy. And so that is the type of therapy that she prefers to use to treat narcissists. And the problem with this is you have so many people, practitioners applying different therapeutic models, that there's really no cohesive long-term research on any one model to see how it's really progressing, to see how one is working in comparison to another. And so that kind of creates its own set of issues. Gestalt therapy, I would probably favor more than cognitive behavioral therapy, which is one of the main types of therapy that is used to treat NPD. Gestalt is a little bit of a more, it's a slower approach. It takes more time, but as Dan mentioned in his video, this is not a short-term fix. This is a commitment on the part of the person suffering with the disorder. Eleanor Greenberg would say 5 to 10 years and bi-weekly sessions. So this is another barrier to treatment, because how many people can devote bi-weekly sessions for 5 to 10 years of therapy, how many people are willing to do that? Whether you're a narcissist,
and it's an expense. You know, we all know that it's physical health care that's prioritized over mental health care. Why? I have no idea. Money. When
we get sick, we can go to a 24-hour clinic and get treatment for $25 copay. But for some reason, mental health isn't taken as seriously. So that's another barrier for people. It's, you know, if you're suffering with depression, realistically, you could go and get help a little bit quicker, especially with the help of medication. But there is no medication to specifically treat NPD or any personality disorder. This has to be done in the office, this work. Another popular form of therapy is psychodynamic talk therapy. This is arguably the most used method to treat NPD. And Dan even mentioned it's not very effective. And so this lends another clue as to why we're not really treating this disorder effectively, is we're using models that don't have a lot of clinical research to back them up, and are not showing a lot of promise. Here's where my perspective
from
what your average practitioner might say about treating the disorder. I consider narcissistic personality disorder a neurodiversity. We know your typical neurodiversities would be people on the spectrum, ADHD, autism. When I say that, I don't mean to lump people who have spectrum disorders and can have an exceptional degree of empathy. I don't mean to lump those people in with narcissists. But what I am saying is narcissists have a way of thinking and relating to people. And it's different. Their brains work differently. Much like someone that's on the spectrum, their minds work differently. And so the problem that therapists have in bonding, I do think is related to a neurotypical treating someone who's neurodiverse. My daughter is ADHD. She was lucky enough to inherit it from me. The most success that she's had over the years in therapy was with a neurodiverse therapist.
Considered herself to be on the autism spectrum. She was brilliant, a brilliant equine therapist
whose specialty was working with neurodiverse clients. There's no clinical research on this. This is my theory. But I do think that a neurodiverse individual working with a neurodiverse client could potentially be a barrier to bonding in the therapeutic setting.
Renee, you mean, did you say neurotypical therapist working with a neurodiverse client, right? Is what you mean?
Yes. Is that not what I said?
I thought you said diverse or neurodiverse and neurodiverse. I could have heard it wrong, but anyway, just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, I mean, if you're, and you know, obviously it's something that could be overcome in time if you're working with enough, you know, narcissistic people over time. You get familiar with the way they think. it lends itself to be able to achieve that client bond more easily. But there was a recent study out there that suggested that people with ADHD are more likely to be victimized by a narcissist. And so when I read that article, the first thing I thought, well, if it is true, on some level, it has to be related to the neurodiversity and the ability of someone on the
to connect
with someone who is also neurodiverse, but for a different reason. And so I would be curious to see if the clinical research, what more clinical research in that direction would show. But those are the kind of things that get my attention and spark my interest, because narcissistically they confirm my theories. So, but it just shows that there's so much research that still needs to be uncovered in this field, and it's not available yet. Cognitive behavioral therapy, I mentioned before, it's a popular form of therapy to treating NPD. I think that might have happened because DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, became a really popular method of dealing with borderline personality disorder. And so because it's a personality disorder, people started assuming, well, if it's working for borderline personality disorder, or it's beneficial, I should say, working might be an overstatement. Well, then of course it would work for NPD. And the problem with that is CBT tends to be a little bit more short term. It focuses on behaviors and then was saying kind of rewarding good behaviors, not rewarding bad behaviors. It might have some immediate benefits, but it does tend to be a little more short term, and treating NPD is something that you really have to get into uncovering, go a little bit deeper and getting into why the narcissist is using these tools that they use to navigate relationships that are preventing them from authentically connecting with others.
Sure. Well, Renee, with CBT, there is the issue that you can get, like you say, some short-term behavioral change. It's great for treating like depression, anxiety, because you deal with catastrophizing words and looking at NPD, you can perhaps get someone to change some of their behavior. You can get them to act more empathetic, but you haven't treated the underlying disease. You haven't treated the NPD. You're just getting their behavior to change. So with the personality disorder, it's not authentic. They can learn to change their behavior and understand that, oh, if I act in a certain way, if I react in a certain way, then I am displaying the appropriate type of empathy I should display in the situation. But there's no authenticity to it. Like Dan says, you're not getting them to be vulnerable and actually change that aspect of their personality. And that's one of the
Frank,
short.
there's this theory. Is there a question? I thought I heard someone.
no.
Nope. No, go ahead.
So yeah, and there's this theory that you could fake it till you make it, and that's kind of the simplified version of neuroplasticity that Dan was referring to in his video. If we can get you, Dan was saying that he was intervening and showing one one of his clients how to be more empathetic toward the wife, and let's show you how this could be done, so that over time, through you showing empathy, even though you're really not feeling it, over time through neuroplasticity, and you could essentially start to feel more empathetic because you've been practicing this for so long. But again, like Dan said, that's something that would take years to achieve. And CBT tends to be more immediate focused. And even though borderline personality disorder is one of the personality disorders, it manifests very differently than NPD. There's huge distinctions. And so, working is very beneficial for someone like the borderline, who you can sometimes just visually see on its face that they act erratically. And so we're kind of getting them to kind of like pipe down on those behaviors so that they can better assimilate in society. And so CBD, or DBT, I should say, DBT, that can work quite effectively, as it's shown for borderline personality disorder.
So let me ask you this. So Dan was talking about how he has this most recent client that's actually showing up with his wife, for which there's an issue about that, which is kind of a family, but not in the classic sense. So if somebody is dealing with family therapy, what are the overlaps and the differences? Because I tend to see family therapy as also involving the children, or you're sort of coming in as a mini group. Am I generally correct in that or not? Or and so what are some of the like similarities and differences? Can you address that?
Usually narcissists present in the family context, meaning they come to seek therapy because, like Dan said, somebody's threatening divorce, somebody's threatening
to take away their children.
And so it's
not usually that they would just show up on their own accord and say, I just feel like I need help. That's usually
not the way it presents itself. The problem is the vast majority of therapists are not marriage and family therapists. We are small in numbers, and we're small on research. And so what ends up happening is marriage and family therapists kind of get pushed to the side under this perspective that, no, this is a serious disorder. It needs to be treated individually with the narcissist. And then, we can go on to dealing with the relationship aspect later once some progress is made. Or some therapists would just flat out say, MFTs don't have any place at all in this setting. And the problem with that perspective is, we know that this is an issue that it does have a genetic component, but whether or not the light switch gets turned on or off is dependent on the family dynamic. This is a disorder that originates in families. This disorder is reinforced in families, and it is presented in the family context. That's just statistics. I think it's unreasonable for us to assume that we are going to treat a narcissist individually who is not involved in some sort of intimate relationship or familial relationship. And so my philosophy is, yes, it does need to be treated. Maybe there's times when it does need to be treated individually, but there's also times that it needs to be treated in the family context. And whether that's done with the same therapist or different therapist, I won't get into that, but it is important also to ensure that family members are not reinforcing these behaviors, that are not putting themselves in a position where the problem is being exacerbated. And there are techniques that victims can use that that can kind of keep the drama to a minimum while the issue is getting worked through. If the narcissist is wanting to make change, like Dan said, not all of them do.
And they use a lot of the same techniques, you know, the manipulations, and it's very easy, in a family therapy situation as well, for them to sort of dominate or attempt to dominate, the situation. So it requires, again, regardless of what type of therapy, requires somebody who can handle the situation, and that's not everybody in the therapy realm, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not discussed. Like I said, I went through my MFT degree not even hearing what NPD was, much less learning how to treat it or address it if someone came through my door. And so, yes, in that regard, therapists can do an injustice if they're treating an individual and not have a clear idea of what they're treating them for.
Any therapist, not just an MFT, but your average,
Facebook therapists, there's a lot of Facebook therapists out there would say marriage and family therapists have no role in treating NPD. And I think that's very overly simplistic and inaccurate.
Okay, you know what? We've just got a couple more minutes. So kind of why don't you take a moment and just sort of wrap up, if you would.
Yeah, so my little last few things here. Okay, other barriers to treating NPD. Is NPD really a problem in a capitalist Kardashian Trumpism society? We are in an environment that can kind of lend itself to narcissistic behavior.
Oh, so we shouldn't be doing therapy, we should be doing training.
Yeah, we should, exactly. We should be doing training, right?
Wow, there's a business model.
Sure is. So a lot of people don't see it as a problem. Well, what do you mean? I mean, hey, yeah, maybe he's a narcissist, but if there's an advantage in it for me, how is it a problem? I'm not having to go home with him and share a bed with him and raise a family with him. How is that my problem? So, it's a societal thing too. It depends on how society operates and views narcissism. And
we're willing as a society to use narcissists to our advantage if we feel it benefits us.
And of course, the biggest problem, and to wrap up with this, is, is it curable? I tend to see narcissism as an addiction. Is an addiction curable? I think strong people can get a hold of their addictive tendencies. And I also think that as they go on in life, situations arise that could potentially lead them back to those addictions, to those ways that they were used to getting by. And so I do think that this is a lifelong process. There's no guarantees. I've never heard anyone other than Dan refer to it as a cure, and I'm all on board for that. But addictions are hard. And at the end of the day, the narcissist needs supply. And in order for him to, or her, to live successfully in life, they have to learn to not rely on that supply, that thing that they've always relied on to feel like they're worth something. And that is why it's so incredibly hard to treat.
Right, because that's just like their drug. And I know, I have a couple of rock star friends. One in particular, I know that has been clean from a whole lot of drugs, mostly heroin, for more than 25 years. And he came over and did a radio show interview with my wife, and he, after about half an hour, he said, "Can we take a break?" He said, "Do you guys have anything sweet around the house?" And so Teresa's, no, I have some cough drops. And he thought that was great. So she went and found like some lemon honey cough drops, and he like took a handful of them, opened up and like put them in his mouth. And a couple minutes later, I was like, he was fine. It's like, okay, so let's continue now. But that many years later, he's still affected by the addiction. And part of the whole interview was about that.
Yeah.
He says, 25 years later, I still get up every day, pray and meditate, and it's another day that I'm still an addict. Yeah, so I see narcissism the same way. You're always there and you're always at risk, but you can work through a lot of it. And I think Dan is awesome. And you're right, he's one of the few people on the planet that I'm aware of that would say you can work through it to the point where it's gone. And I don't know if he would say it's gone for good, but it's certainly gone from the person's life for a period of time. So Renee, thanks. I have enjoyed having you and Dan and along for for this project, and especially in class here. I value your contributions so very, very much. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Renee. Woo.
Thanks for having me. It was so much fun.
All right, we will be in touch very
Thanks,
soon. Okay, take care.
Sounds good. Take care. Bye, everyone.